In the harsh Arizona territory of 1885, dust-covered settlers gathered at Holloway's trading post, their laughter cutting through the heat as Standing Hawk approached. The Apache warrior's weathered face remained stoic as he proclaimed his intention to purchase Shadow Creek Canyon land, the settlers considered worthless. Their mockery echoed against wooden walls as they dismissed him, unaware of what lay beneath the ancient rock formation. 3 days later, Standing Hawk returned, carrying something that made hardened frontiersmen step back in disbelief. What ancient secret had been hiding in Apache lands all this time? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Benjamin Holloway wiped dust from the ancient brass scale, his weathered hands steady despite his 65 years. The trading post had stood at this crossroads since before Arizona was a territory, its wooden bones creaking with the weight of frontier history. $2.30, he announced, pushing a small sack of coffee beans across the worn counter. Sarah Miller, a farmer's wife with sun-leathered skin, counted coins from a small cloth purse. "Prices keep climbing, Mr. Holloway. Freight costs from Tucson," Benjamin replied with a slight shrug. War between the railroad companies. The trading post interior remained cool despite the punishing heat outside. Pelts hung from ceiling beams, barrels of supplies lined rough-hewn walls, and glass cases displayed finer goods, medicines, jewelry, and ammunition. The scents of leather, tobacco, and coffee mingled in the air. The door swung open, bringing a burst of sunlight and the imposing figure of Marshal Thomas Reed. At 58, the lawman moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd survived 3 decades enforcing order in a lawless land. "Benjamin," he nodded, removing his hat. "Mrs. Miller." Sarah gathered her purchases, nodding respectfully before departing. "Coffee?" Benjamin offered, already reaching for a tin pot warming on the small stove. "Much oblige." Reed settled his frame onto a sturdy wooden chair. "Heard about the Apache at your counter yesterday." Standing Hawk. Benjamin poured the black liquid into a chipped mug. "News travels fast. Town this size, a man can't sneeze without 3 people offering a handkerchief." Reed took a careful sip. "What's this about him wanting to buy Shadow Creek Canyon?" Benjamin pulled out a territorial map from beneath the counter, unfolding it carefully. Yellowed with age and marked with faded ink, it showed the region's disputed boundaries. Shadow Creek Canyon sat at the edge, marked simply as unexplored. "Been coming in for years. Fair trader, never caused trouble," Benjamin said. "First time he's mentioned the canyon. That land's not worth the paper it's drawn on," Reed observed. "Too rocky for farming, no water for cattle, too remote for mining equipment. Why's he want it?" Before Benjamin could answer, the back door opened. Elizabeth Holloway entered carrying a stack of books, her simple dress and practical boots, a contrast to the Eastern education evident in her speech. "Father, I've organized these." She stopped, noticing the marshal. "Good afternoon, Marshal Reed. Miss Holloway. Boston treating you well?" It was educational. She set down the books. "But I'm here now." Benjamin smiled with quiet pride. His daughter had returned from 4 years at a women's college back east, bringing knowledge but maintaining the practical sensibilities needed for frontier life. Elizabeth started teaching local children, Benjamin explained. "All of them." Reed's eyebrow raised slightly, settler and Apache alike. "Knowledge belongs to everyone willing to learn," she replied with quiet determination. Reed nodded thoughtfully. "Noble idea. Not everyone shares it." Standing Hawk brings his son, Benjamin added. "Running Wolf, bright boy." "Which brings us back to the canyon," Reed said, tapping the map. "Some folks in town are already talking." William Fletcher was asking questions. Benjamin's expression darkened. "Fletcher has questions about anything that might turn a profit. Canyon's been empty since anyone can remember," Reed continued. "Some say it's cursed, superstitious nonsense, but it's kept people away." Elizabeth studied the map. "The Apache have stories about the canyon too." Running Wolf mentioned something about ancient guardians, Every piece of this territory has a story, Benjamin replied. Most are just that, stories. Standing Hawk isn't the type for ghost tales, Reed observed. If he wants that land, he has reasons. The conversation paused as a group of settlers entered, dust covered from the trail. Benjamin moved to attend them while Reed remained seated, his eyes returning to the map. People are pushing further into Apache lands every month, he said quietly to Elizabeth. Treaties get signed in Washington by men who've never seen this territory, then broken out here by men who don't care. Elizabeth nodded, her finger tracing the boundary lines on the map. Standing Hawk is trying to use the settlers' own system against them. Buy the land before it's taken. Smart, Reed acknowledged. If he can manage it. Question is why that worthless canyon? Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as a lone figure watched the trading post from the shade of a distant cottonwood. Standing Hawk observed the comings and goings, his expression revealing nothing of his plans for the canyon that no one else seemed to want. Firelight danced across weathered faces as the Apache camp settled into evening rituals. Standing Hawk sat cross-legged before his dwelling, carefully unwrapping a bundle of soft deerskin. Inside lay a pipe carved from red stone, its stem adorned with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork. His fingers traced the worn symbols etched into its bowl, marks made by hands long, returned to the earth. You speak with the elders again tonight? White Feather asked, approaching with quiet grace. At 40, his wife's beauty remained undimmed by the hardships of their diminishing world. The ancestors guide my thoughts, Standing Hawk replied, filling the pipe with a mixture of tobacco and herbs. White Feather settled beside him, her skilled hands continuing to weave a basket. Running Wolf should join you. He needs the old ways. He walks between two worlds, Standing Hawk said, glancing toward their son, who sat apart, carving a piece of wood while studying a book, a gift from Elizabeth Holloway. As do you, she replied. But you remember which world gave you life. The camp spread before them, 23 dwellings housing the remainder of their band. Once they had numbered in the hundreds, roaming ancestral lands freely. Now they occupied this small valley, hemmed in by invisible lines drawn on white men's papers. Running Wolf approached, his tall frame silhouetted against the communal fire. At 20, he carried himself with the dignity of his father, but wore the restlessness of youth. Elizabeth has taught me more words, he said, holding up the book, stories of places beyond the great water. Standing Hawk nodded. Knowledge is a weapon that cannot be taken from you. The elders say you went to the canyon again, Running Wolf said, sitting beside his parents. 3 times this month. Standing Hawk lit the pipe with a twig from the fire, drawing smoke deeply before passing it to his son. The dreams come stronger now. Running Wolf accepted the pipe with proper reverence. The same dreams, always the same. The stone sentinels, the hidden door, the light that speaks. White Feather's hands paused in their weaving. Morning Sky says such dreams are messages. As if summoned by her words, an elderly woman approached, her face a map of deep lines, etched by nearly 8 decades of life. Morning Sky was the oldest member of their band, the keeper of stories that stretched back to when the people first entered this land. The canyon calls to you, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. As it called to your grandfather. Standing Hawk looked up sharply. My grandfather never spoke of this. Some truths wait for the proper time. Morning Sky lowered herself carefully beside them. Your grandfather was not chosen. The canyon rejected him. Running Wolf returned the pipe to his father. What is hidden there? Knowledge older than our people, Morning Sky replied. The ancient ones left guardians to watch over their wisdom until the worthy one came. White Feather's expression showed concern. The settlers push closer every season. Something of value lies in the canyon. They would take it, Standing Hawk finished, as they have taken everything else. Unless it belongs to someone, Running Wolf said thoughtfully. Their law respects ownership. Standing Hawk nodded. This is why I must buy the canyon. With what? White Feather asked. We have little they value. Standing Hawk gazed into the fire. Perhaps the canyon itself will provide what we need. The conversation paused as a young warrior approached, bringing word that hunters had returned with deer. The camp stirred with renewed activity. Later, as the moon rose high, Standing Hawk stood alone at the edge of the camp. From a small pouch, he withdrew something that caught the moonlight with an unusual gleam, a fragment of stone unlike any natural formation, with markings that seemed to shift in the silvery light. He had found it 3 days ago, half buried in a narrow crevice within Shadow Creek Canyon. The dreams had led him to that exact spot, just as they now urged him to return. Tomorrow he would show this fragment at the trading post. The white settlers understood value differently than his people, but this object would speak a language they all recognized. The language of mystery and promise. Standing Hawk carefully returned the fragment to its pouch. The canyon had chosen him as its voice. Now he must ensure his people became its rightful guardians before others discovered what lay hidden in its depths. The trading post fell silent as Standing Hawk placed the object on the counter. Afternoon sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the stone fragment's unusual surface. Intricate symbols carved into its face seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Benjamin Holloway adjusted his spectacles, leaning closer. "I've never seen anything like this." "Nor have I," Standing Hawk replied, his voice measured. "It comes from the canyon." The small crowd of settlers who had gathered at word of the Apache's return now pressed forward, curiosity overcoming their usual distance. "Looks like an old Indian carving to me," said William Fletcher, a barrel-chested man whose recent wealth from cattle had purchased influence throughout the territory. "Primitive artwork, nothing more." "I don't believe it is," came a new voice from the doorway. Heads turned to see a bearded gentleman in a travel-worn suit entering the trading post. Despite the frontier dust coating his attire, he carried himself with scholarly dignity. "Professor James Harrington," he introduced himself, approaching the counter. "Historian with the University of Pennsylvania." "I couldn't help overhearing." Elizabeth Holloway stepped forward. "What brings you to our settlement, Professor?" "Research expedition," Harrington replied, eyes fixed on the stone fragment, documenting pre-Columbian settlements in the territory. He glanced at Standing Hawk. "My eye?" The Apache nodded once, and Harrington carefully lifted the stone, turning it to catch the light. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "These markings share characteristics with several ancient writing systems, but the combination is unprecedented." Marshall Reed, observing from the corner, stepped closer. "Meaning what exactly?" Harrington looked up, suddenly aware of the attention. "Meaning this artifact doesn't align with any known indigenous artifacts from this region. The material itself appears unusual as well." Fletcher scoffed. "You're saying our local Apache found some foreign trinket and is now claiming it's from that worthless canyon?" "I claim nothing," Standing Hawk said calmly. "The stone speaks for itself." Standing Hawk reached into his pouch and withdrew a second object, a perfectly round disc of obsidian, polished to a mirror-like finish. He placed it beside the fragment. "This was found with it." Professor Harrington's eyebrows rose. "Ceremonial mirror." Several ancient cultures used obsidian mirrors for divination. He lifted it carefully, then frowned, "But the craftsmanship is remarkably precise. The surface is ground to perfection." Elizabeth leaned closer. "The symbols on the edge match those on the stone fragment."
"Indeed they do,"
Harrington confirmed. "A connected set of artifacts, then." Fletcher pushed forward. "So what? Old trinkets don't make that canyon worth anything." "On the contrary," Harrington said, excitement evident in his voice. "These artifacts suggest a previously undocumented civilization in this region. If there are more such items in the canyon, it could be an archaeological treasure trove." Benjamin studied Standing Hawk's face. "This is why you want to buy the canyon, to protect what's there." Standing Hawk nodded. "My people have stories of the ancient ones who came before. The canyon holds their secrets." Fletcher's expression shifted, calculation replacing dismissal. And now you're willing to pay for land nobody wanted last week. I will bring payment in 7 days, Standing Hawk confirmed. The canyon isn't officially claimed, Marshal Reed noted. Under territorial law, anyone with proper payment can file for ownership. Fletcher turned to leave, but not before saying over his shoulder, 7 days is a long time, Indian. Plenty can happen before then. As the crowd dispersed, Professor Harrington approached Standing Hawk. I'd very much like to document these artifacts properly. Perhaps we could discuss what else you've found. Standing Hawk studied the professor's eager face. There is more to see, but the canyon chooses who may enter its secrets. Elizabeth, who had been examining the obsidian mirror, suddenly gasped. Father, look at this. When tilted at a certain angle, the mirror's surface didn't reflect the trading post's interior, but seemed to show a stone corridor no one present recognized. A trick of the light, Benjamin suggested, though uncertainty tinged his voice. Professor Harrington stared in fascination. Or perhaps something else entirely. Standing Hawk calmly returned both artifacts to his pouch. The canyon has awakened. Now we must decide who will hear its voice. The Silver Dollar Saloon hummed with evening activity, piano notes competing with the clink of glasses and murmur of conversation. William Fletcher occupied the corner table, his table fingers absently stroking the silver pocket watch that never left his possession. 3 men sat with him, speaking in hushed tones despite the ambient noise. Telegraph went out this morning, Fletcher said, clicking open the watch to check the time. My associates in Chicago will be very interested in potential mining opportunities. Mining? Asked Mason, a lean man with a gunfighter's eyes. Thought you said this was about old Indian trinkets. Fletcher smiled thinly. That's what the Apache believes is valuable. I'm more practical. He snapped the watch closed. Where there are unusual stones, there are unusual minerals. Gold, silver, copper, perhaps something even more valuable. The saloon doors swung open, admitting Marshal Reed. Fletcher nodded to his companions, who quieted as the lawman approached. Evening, Marshal, Fletcher said pleasantly. Care to join? Is making my rounds, Reed replied, standing at the edge of the table. Noticed you've hired some new hands lately. Fletcher gestured to the men around him. The cattle business is expanding. Reed's eyes lingered on Mason's holstered pistol. Funny, they don't look like cowhands to me. Versatile skills in these uncertain times, Fletcher replied smoothly, toying with his watch chain. I hear that Apache is gathering resources to buy Shadow Creek Canyon. News travels fast. I'm curious how a man with no visible means of support intends to purchase property, Fletcher said. Even worthless property. Reed's expression remained neutral. The Apache have their own economy, trade goods, horses. Of course, Fletcher conceded. But territorial law requires U.S. currency for land transactions, doesn't it? Before Reed could answer, commotion erupted near the bar. A young cowhand, deep in his cups, was loudly proclaiming his opinions about Indians thinking they can buy white men's land. Reed excused himself to handle the disturbance, leaving Fletcher and his men to their conversation. Mason, I want you to follow our Apache friend, Fletcher instructed once Reed was out of earshot. Discreetly, find out where he's getting his money, and what else he might have found in that canyon. Across town in Benjamin Holloway's back room, Professor Harrington hunched over the trading post's scarred oak table, making detailed sketches of the stone fragment by lamplight. Elizabeth and Benjamin looked on with fascination. The symbols contain elements of at least 3 distinct writing systems, Harrington explained, his academic enthusiasm evident. Mesoamerican, possibly Maya. Something reminiscent of early Mediterranean scripts. And a 3rd system I cannot identify at all. How is that possible? Elizabeth asked. Those cultures never interacted. Harrington looked up from his work. That's precisely what makes this extraordinary. Conventional archaeology would say it's impossible. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably. What about the mirror? That reflection wasn't natural. No, Harrington agreed. It wasn't. I've read accounts of obsidian mirrors used in ancient divination rituals, but nothing that could create such a specific image. A knock at the door interrupted them. Benjamin opened it to find Standing Hawk and his son. You asked to see more, Standing Hawk said simply. Running Wolf carried a small bundle, wrapped in deerskin. He placed it on the table and carefully unwrapped it, revealing several small carved stones, each marked with symbols matching those on the larger fragment. "We found these near the entrance to the canyon," Running Wolf explained, "scattered as if to mark a path." Harrington examined them with growing excitement. "These are positioned intention. The stories say the Ancient Ones left markers for those who would come later," Standing Hawk said. Elizabeth arranged the stones in different patterns. They fit together like a puzzle. As they worked, at the territorial office a half-mile away, Fletcher was engaged in earnest conversation with the land clerk. "The canyon isn't officially claimed," the clerk explained, checking his ledgers. "First person to file proper paperwork with payment gets legal ownership." "And how much would that payment be?" Fletcher inquired, fingering his watch. $50 for a claim that size." Fletcher smiled. "I'd like to file immediately." The clerk frowned. "There's already interest from the Apache man. Curtis, suggests." Fletcher placed a $100 note on the desk. "I believe in efficiency, not courtesy. The extra is for expediting the paperwork." Back at the trading post, as the group puzzled over the stone markers, Marshall Reed arrived with troubling news. "Fletcher's making moves at the territorial office," he announced without preamble. "Trying to claim the canyon before your 7 days are up." Standing Hawk's expression remained unchanged. "Can he do this?" "Legally, yes," Reed admitted. "First to file with payment gets the land." Benjamin slammed his hand on the table. "That's not right." Standing Hawk declared his intention first. "Intention isn't the same as filing," Reed said. "You need to make your claim official. Immediately." Standing Hawk and Running Wolf exchanged glances. "We do not yet have enough of your currency," Standing Hawk admitted. "I can help," Benjamin offered without hesitation. Professor Harrington looked up from the stone markers. "As can I. This discovery is too important for scientific understanding to let it fall into Fletcher's hands." Dawn broke over the territorial office as Benjamin Holloway, Standing Hawk and Marshall Reed stood before the bleary-eyed clerk. The night had been long, with Benjamin gathering what currency he could from his personal savings. $43, Benjamin said, placing the money on the counter. "That's all I have on hand." The clerk yawned, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "Filing fee is $50, Mr. Holloway." "Rules are rules." Standing Hawk placed 3 silver bracelets beside the money. "These are Apache craftsmanship, worth more than $7 to the right buyer." The clerk shook his head. "U.S. currency only. I can't accept trade goods." Marshall Reed leaned forward. "Fletcher's payment isn't officially recorded yet, is it?" "No," the clerk admitted. "He made the offer last night, but I need to complete the paperwork this morning." He pulled out a blank land claim certificate, the territorial seal prominent at its top. "Then Standing Hawk still has time," Reed pressed. "Until I process Mr. Fletcher's claim, yes," the clerk said, "but he's coming at 9 o'clock, and he has the full amount." The office door opened, and Professor Harrington hurried in, slightly winded. "I have it," he announced, placing $7 silver on the counter. "The remainder of the filing fee." Benjamin looked at him with surprise. "Professor, consider it an investment in scientific discovery," Harrington explained. "The historical value of what may be in that canyon far exceeds $50. The clerk counted the money carefully, then reached for his pen. "Very well, I'll need the exact boundaries for the claim." As the paperwork was being completed, the door swung open again. William Fletcher stood in the entrance, his expression darkening as he assessed the scene. "I see you've decided to circumvent our agreement," he said to Standing Hawk. 7 days apparently meant nothing. "There was no agreement," Benjamin replied. "Only a statement of intention." Fletcher approached the counter, noting the claim certificate being filled out. "I offered twice the filing fee yesterday." "You did," the clerk confirmed nervously, "but no paperwork was completed. These gentlemen have presented the full amount this morning." Fletcher's jaw tightened as he fingered his silver watch. "I see. Well, business is business." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Congratulations on your purchase, Mr. Standing Hawk. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement about access to the canyon for mutual benefit. The canyon is not for exploitation, Standing Hawk replied evenly. Fletcher nodded as if in understanding. Of course. Cultural preservation. Very admirable. He turned to leave, then paused. But I wonder how secure is your claim if you don't know exactly what's in your new property. A full survey would be prudent, wouldn't it? After Fletcher departed, Marshal Reed frowned. He gave up too easily. He's planning something. Benjamin agreed. By mid-morning, the small party had gathered supplies and horses for an expedition to the canyon. Elizabeth insisted on joining them, her knowledge of both settler and Apache customs making her a valuable intermediary. The clerk mentioned survey reports, she said as they prepared the horses. Apparently, no official has ever mapped the interior. The canyon's been avoided by surveyors. Professor Harrington secured his scientific instruments to his saddle. All the more intriguing, places that people avoid often hold the most fascinating discovery. Standing Hawk mounted his horse with fluid grace. My people avoided it because the elders instructed us to wait. The time for waiting has ended. The journey to Shadow Creek Canyon took 3 hours, following a narrow trail that wound through mesquite and cactus. As they approached, the landscape changed dramatically, the dusty terrain giving way to towering red rock formations that seemed to rise from nowhere. The canyon entrance was narrower than expected, barely wide enough for 2 horses to ride abreast. Vertical walls of retreated rock rose hundreds of feet on either side, creating a natural corridor that seemed to lead deep into the earth. It's cooler here, Elizabeth noted with surprise as they entered the shadow of the canyon. Benjamin nodded. Wind effect, natural ventilation. Standing Hawk dismounted, touching the canyon wall reverently. The stories say this was once a place of learning, where the ancient ones taught those who came seeking wisdom. Professor Harrington examined the rock face closely. These aren't natural formations, he said suddenly, pointing to subtle patterns in the stone. These lines, they're too regular, too precise. The group gathered around, seeing what they had initially missed. The canyon walls, while appearing natural from a distance, showed signs of ancient craftsmanship, geometric patterns carefully carved into the living rock, nearly obscured by centuries of weathering. It's like the symbols on the fragment, Elizabeth whispered. Standing Hawk nodded. The ancient ones shaped the canyon itself. This is why it must be protected. As they ventured deeper, the afternoon sun created shifting patterns of light and shadow on the canyon floor. Standing Hawk led them to a particular rock formation that resembled a seated figure. This is where I found the first fragment, he explained. The dreams led me here. Benjamin examined the formation with growing wonder. I've lived in this territory for 40 years. How have I never heard about this? Because the canyon wished to remain hidden, Standing Hawk replied simply. Until now, Professor Harrington frowned at the brass compass in his palm. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle on any direction. Most peculiar, he muttered, tapping the glass face. The magnetic field here is severely disrupted. The expedition had ventured deeper into Shadow Creek Canyon, following the subtle patterns carved into the rock walls. The afternoon sun barely penetrated here, casting everything in a cool blue twilight. Could it be mineral deposits? Elizabeth asked, watching the spinning needle. Possibly, Harrington conceded. Lodestone or magnetite could cause interference. But this level of disruption suggests something more significant. Standing Hawk studied the symbols etched into a nearby boulder. The Ancient Ones spoke of the Earth's blood flowing strongly here. Benjamin knelt to examine unusual crystalline formations sprouting between rock crevices. I've never seen minerals like these in the territory. Running Wolf, who had been scouting ahead, returned with excitement visible in his normally composed features. Father, there's something you need to see. He led them around a bend where the canyon widened into a natural amphitheater. At its center stood 3 stone columns arranged in a perfect triangle, each 20 feet tall and covered with the same symbols found on the fragment. It's an intentional arrangement, Harrington breathed, his compass now spinning so rapidly the needle was a blur. Constructed with mathematical precision, Elizabeth approached one column cautiously. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. How could anyone carve such perfect cylinders? More importantly, who? Benjamin added. Standing Hawk circled the formation slowly. The stones from my pouch, they match patterns here. He removed the small carved stones they had examined at the trading post, placing them on a flat rock at the triangle's center. Harrington meticulously documented everything in his field journal, making sketches and notations. This predates any known civilization in this region by thousands of years, he declared. The academic establishment will have difficulty accepting this discovery. As they explored the amphitheater, Running Wolf called out from behind one of the columns, "There's an opening here." The group gathered around what appeared to be a narrow vertical crack in the canyon wall, almost invisible unless viewed from a specific angle. Cool air flowed outward, carrying a scent of earth and something unidentifiable. A cave system, Benjamin suggested, or a constructed passage. Harrington countered, examining the edges. These are too precise for natural formation. Standing Hawk positioned himself where sunlight reflected off one column onto the crack. In the old stories, the entrance to the Ancient One's dwelling could only be found when light and shadow balanced perfectly. As if responding to his words, the angle of sunlight shifted slightly, illuminating symbols around the crack that had been invisible moments before. The pattern matched exactly the arrangement of the small stones from Standing Hawk's pouch. It's a key, Elizabeth realized. The stones are a key to this entrance. Before they could investigate further, the distant sound of horses echoed through the canyon. Marshal Reed, who had been keeping watch near the entrance, hurried to join them. "Riders coming," he reported. "At least 5, moving fast." Benjamin's expression hardened. "Fletcher, we should conceal this," Harrington said urgently, indicating the columns and crack. "If he sees what we've found." "No time," Reed replied. "They'll be here in minutes." Standing Hawk quickly gathered the small stones, returning them to his pouch. "The canyon has revealed itself to us, not to them. We must trust it will keep its secrets." The group retreated to the canyon entrance, arriving just as Fletcher appeared, with 4 men, including Mason. All were armed, though their weapons remained holstered. "Quite the expedition party," Fletcher observed, dismounting smoothly. "Finding anything interesting in your new property, Mr. Standing Hawk?" "Rocks and dirt," Benjamin replied before Standing Hawk could speak. "Hardly worth the filing fee if you ask me." Fletcher smiled thinly. "And yet you seem to have spent all day examining these rocks and dirt." Professor Harrington stepped forward, clutching his malfunctioning compass. "Geological survey," he explained. "Academic interest only. The rock formations here have unusual properties." "Indeed," Fletcher raised an eyebrow. "What sort of properties?" "Magnetic anomalies," Harrington offered, showing the spinning compass. "Fascinating from a scientific perspective, but hardly practical." Fletcher studied their faces carefully. "Well, don't let us interrupt your academic pursuits. My associates and I are simply exploring the territory. Public land adjacent to private claims is still accessible to all citizens." "Of course," Marshal Reed agreed, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Just like private land is restricted to its legal owner and invited guests." The warning in his words was clear. Fletcher acknowledged it with a slight nod. "We'll make camp outside the canyon tonight," he announced. "Perhaps tomorrow Mr. Standing Hawk might give us a proper tour of his interesting purchase." As Fletcher and his men departed, Standing Hawk turned to the others. "We must return to the columns before sundown. The light will be perfect then." "And Fletcher," Benjamin asked. "We'll be watching the canyon entrance," Reed noted grimly. Elizabeth looked thoughtful. "Then perhaps we need another way in." "There are stories of hidden paths," Morning Sky said, her ancient voice barely above a whisper. The tribal elder had joined them at Standing Hawk's camp, where they had retreated to plan their next move. Night had fallen, bringing a chill to the desert air, and casting their counsel in flickering firelight. "The canyons are like rivers flowing beneath the earth," she continued, gnarled fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. "What appears separate above may connect below." Benjamin studied the rough map Morning Sky had drawn. "Are you suggesting there's another entrance to Shadow Creek Canyon?" "Not suggesting," the elder replied. "Knowing." She pointed to a location half a mile from the main canyon entrance. Here, where 3 junipers grow from one root. The ancient ones called it the breath of the earth. Running Wolf nodded in recognition. I know this place. Air flows from a crack in the rocks, even on still days. Professor Harrington looked intrigued. A natural ventilation system. If the canyon contains extensive cave networks, such airflows would be necessary. We'll need to move carefully. Marshal Reed cautioned. Fletcher's men are watching the main entrance, but they may have scouts patrolling the perimeter as well. Elizabeth, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. We should divide our efforts. Some create a distraction at the main entrance, while others investigate this hidden path. Dawn found Benjamin, Elizabeth and the marshal approaching the canyon's main entrance with pack mules and survey equipment, making a deliberate show of their presence. Fletcher's men camped nearby watched with obvious interest. "Good morning, gentlemen," Reed called, tipping his hat. "Beautiful day for geological research." Meanwhile, a mile away, Standing Hawk led Harrington and Running Wolf through a narrow ravine toward the place morning sky had indicated. The 3 juniper trees, twisted and ancient, grew impossibly from a single point in the rocky soil. At their base, a narrow fissure emitted a steady flow of cool air. "Remarkable," Harrington murmured, feeling the air current. The temperature difference suggests a connection to a substantial underground system. Standing Hawk knelt beside the opening. "The stories say only those of pure intention could pass through the breath." Running Wolf looked skeptical. "The opening is barely wide enough for a child." "Perhaps that's by design," Harrington suggested, examining the edges of the fissure. "A test of worthiness, or simply a way to keep larger predators out." Standing Hawk removed the stone fragments from his pouch, arranging them in the pattern they had seen at the stone columns. As he placed the final piece, a rumbling vibration passed through the ground beneath them. The fissure widened, rocks shifting to create an opening just large enough for a man to pass through on hands and knees. "Ingenious mechanism," Harrington breathed, his academic excitement overcoming momentary fear. "A counterweight system triggered by the correct pattern." Standing Hawk lit a torch. "I will go first." The passage descended steeply, requiring them to climb carefully in the flickering torchlight. After nearly 100 feet, it leveled out into a tunnel tall enough to stand in, its walls smooth and clearly shaped by tools rather than nature. "These are the same symbols," Running Wolf noted, pointing to markings along the walls. The tunnel curved gently, leading them deeper until they emerged into a small chamber. At its center sat a stone pedestal, and upon it an object that seemed impossibly out of place, a perfectly preserved clay flute, its surface decorated with intricate symbols matching those on the stone fragments. "Extraordinary preservation," Harrington whispered, approaching the pedestal. "This chamber must be completely sealed from the elements." Standing Hawk carefully lifted the flute, examining its structure. 8 holes arranged unlike any instrument of my people. Harrington studied the hole placement. The spacing follows a mathematical ratio, similar to the distance between the stone columns above. Running Wolf pointed to the far wall, where a larger opening led deeper. "There's our path forward." As they proceeded, the tunnel gradually widened until they found themselves emerging behind one of the stone columns in the amphitheater they had discovered. The previous day, they had successfully bypassed Fletcher's watchers. The columns are not just markers, Standing Hawk realized. They are guardians of the path. Harrington examined the crack in the wall they had found earlier, now clearly visible in the morning light. "The entrance we found yesterday must connect to the same tunnel system." Standing Hawk held up the clay flute. "This was left as a key, a test to ensure only those who understand the Ancient One's knowledge could proceed." Running Wolf examined the vertical crack. "How does a flute open stone?" "Sound," Harrington suggested, his eyes wide with realization. Vibration at the correct frequency could trigger a mechanism similar to the one at the hidden entrance. Standing Hawk raised the flute to his lips, hesitating briefly. "The breath of life awakens the sleeping earth," he said, quoting an ancient tribal saying. Then he played a sequence of notes that seemed to flow from memory he didn't know he possessed. The notes echoed strangely, amplified by the stone columns. As the final tone faded, the vertical crack widened silently, revealing a doorway into darkness. The stone doorway opened onto a short passage that descended into darkness. Standing Hawk led the way, torch held high, with Professor Harrington and Running Wolf close behind. The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying a faint mineral scent unlike the desert above. "The floor is too even," Running Wolf observed, running his hand along the smooth stone wall. "No natural cave forms this way." "Indeed," Harrington agreed. "This was carved with remarkable precision and without modern tools." After 30 paces, the narrow passage widened suddenly. Standing Hawk's torch seemed to dim, not because it was failing, but because it was being outshone by a soft blue luminescence emanating from the chamber before them. "Extraordinary," Harrington whispered. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 40 feet across, its walls embedded with thousands of crystals that emitted a steady, pulsing blue light. The effect created patterns of light and shadow that seemed to move subtly, like ripples on water. "The light of the ancestors," Standing Hawk said quietly, lowering his now unnecessary torch. Harrington approached the nearest wall, examining the crystals with scientific curiosity. "No heat," he noted, holding his hand near one. "No combustion. Yet they generate light." Running Wolf circled the chamber slowly. "They're arranged in patterns, like the stars in the night sky." He was right. The crystals weren't randomly distributed, but placed in specific configurations that resembled constellations. At the chamber's center stood a circular stone table, its surface inlaid with a map that matched the crystal patterns on the walls. A star map, Harrington realized, his voice hushed with awe. "But some of these constellations don't match our current night sky." Standing Hawk studied the central table. "The elders say the stars move over great cycles of time. Perhaps this shows the sky as it once was. Or will be," Running Wolf suggested. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "Precession of the equinox. The stars' apparent positions change over approximately 26,000 years due to Earth's axial wobble. This could depict the sky from thousands of years ago, or thousands of years in the future." As they examined the chamber, Standing Hawk noticed openings leading off in several directions. "This is a crossroads," he observed. "Which way do we proceed?" Running Wolf asked. Before anyone could answer, a distant sound echoed through the passage behind them. Voices. Fletcher's men had discovered the hidden entrance. "We need to move," Harrington urged, "and seal the passage behind us if possible." Standing Hawk quickly assessed the 3 available paths. One sloped upward, another downward, while the third remained level. He placed the clay flute on the central table, and immediately the crystal constellation directly above the downward path brightened. "The Ancient Ones suggest our direction," he said, retrieving the flute. They hurried down the indicated passage, which spiraled gradually deeper underground. Behind them they heard exclamations of surprise as Fletcher's men discovered the crystal chamber. "They'll follow our tracks in the dust," Running Wolf warned. "Perhaps not," Harrington replied, pointing ahead. The spiral passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but no less remarkable. Its floor was covered with a shallow pool of clear water that reflected the luminescent crystals embedded in the ceiling, creating the illusion of infinite depth. "We must cross," Standing Hawk said, eyeing the narrow stone path that formed a bridge across the water. As they stepped onto the path, the water rippled strangely, not from their movement, but from some force beneath the surface. When they reached the center, a deep rumbling shook the chamber. Behind them, the entrance to the spiral passage sealed itself, a slab of stone sliding silently into place. "Remarkable engineering," Harrington marveled. Despite their predicament, the weight distribution on this bridge must trigger the mechanism. From the sealed entrance, they could hear muffled shouts of Fletcher's men, now trapped in the crystal chamber. "Will they be able to open it?" Running Wolf asked. Standing Hawk shook his head. not without understanding what they've found. The Ancient Ones built this place to test worthiness, not merely to hide secrets. They continued across the bridge to another passage on the far side. This one was wider, its walls lined with alcoves containing objects of obvious significance, tools of unknown purpose, vessels made from unfamiliar materials, and tablets covered with the same writing system found on the stone fragments. "This is unprecedented," Harrington said, examining one tablet without touching it. "Evidence of a sophisticated civilization predating any known culture in this region." "The Ancient Ones were teachers," Standing Hawk said. "They left knowledge for those who would come after." Running Wolf pointed ahead. "There's something else." The passage ended at a circular chamber different from the others. Instead of crystal light, this room was illuminated by a single beam of sunlight from a shaft, reaching to the surface. The beam struck a polished metal disc at the center, reflecting onto a curved wall covered with intricate engravings. "It's some kind of library," Harrington realized, "or repository of knowledge." Standing Hawk approached the metal disc. "This is what we were meant to find." As his shadow crossed the disc, the reflected light shifted, illuminating different sections of the engraved wall. The images told a story of beings who came from the sky, of knowledge shared with early peoples, and of a promise to return when humanity was ready. "The origin story of the Ancient Ones," Standing Hawk said softly. "Not from this earth at all. This contradicts everything in established archaeology," Professor Harrington murmured, carefully documenting the engravings with sketches in his journal. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from intellectual excitement. "If what these images suggest is true." Standing Hawk studied the central portion of the wall, where the light beam focused most intensely. "My people's oldest stories speak of teachers who came from the sky world. I always believed they were spiritual metaphors." Running Wolf traced a particular symbol that recurred throughout the engravings. "This appears in our most sacred ceremonies. We've been preserving their knowledge without fully understanding it." As the sun shifted position outside, the beam of light moved across the metal disc, illuminating different sections of the engraved wall. The three men watched in silence as new images were revealed, detailed depictions of what appeared to be technological devices, mathematical formulas, and star charts of impossible complexity. "There's something else here," Running Wolf said suddenly, noticing a small alcove near the floor that had remained in shadow until now. Inside sat a perfectly spherical object about the size of a man's fist, made of a transparent crystal-like material. Standing Hawk knelt to examine it without touching. "It matches the description in our oldest creation story, the Eye of the Sky people." Harrington joined him, scholarly caution momentarily forgotten. "It's perfectly formed, no visible tool marks or imperfection." After a moment's hesitation, Standing Hawk carefully lifted the sphere. As soon as his hands made contact, the object began to emit a soft, pulsing light from its center. The light grew stronger, and suddenly the air above the sphere filled with a shimmering three-dimensional projection of unfamiliar celestial bodies, stars, planets, and what appeared to be pathways connecting them. "Good Lord," Harrington gasped, stepping back. The projection rotated slowly, showing a star system with 7 planets. One planet was highlighted, with a line extending from it toward another star system containing a familiar arrangement, Earth's solar system. The image zoomed in on Earth, then further to show the specific region where they now stood. "A map," Standing Hawk said quietly, "showing their journey from a distant star system to Earth," Harrington confirmed, his worldview visibly transforming with each passing moment. "This technology is beyond anything we currently possess." Running Wolf studied the projection with intense focus. "One star shines brighter than the others. They're the one at the center of their home system." Indeed, one star pulsed more intensely in the projection. As they watched, the image shifted again, showing this star experiencing some kind of cataclysmic event, expanding dramatically before contracting. "A supernova," Harrington suggested. "Or some stellar event that forced them to leave their home." Before they could discuss further, a low rumbling echoed through the chamber. Dust sifted down from the ceiling as the entire structure vibrated. Fletcher's men, Running Wolf said grimly. They must be trying to force the sealed passage. Standing Hawk carefully returned the viewing sphere to its alcove, but not before noticing something extraordinary, a small depression in the alcove wall behind where the sphere had rested. The depression contained a metallic object, unlike anything he had seen before. "There's more here," he said, reaching for it. Harrington laid a cautionary hand on his arm. "We should proceed carefully. These artifacts have been undisturbed for thousands of years." Another, stronger rumble shook the chamber. This time, small pieces of stone broke loose from the ceiling. "We may not have the luxury of caution," Standing Hawk replied, retrieving the metallic object, a small disc similar to the larger one that reflected the sunbeam, but sized to fit in the palm of a hand. The moment he touched it, the viewing sphere's projection changed, now showing a path leading deeper into the earth beneath the canyon. The projected path terminated at what appeared to be a larger chamber containing something the projection depicted as a brilliant light source. "It's showing us where to go next," Running Wolf realized. "Or warning us away," Harrington suggested. Standing Hawk studied the projection intently. In the stories, the Sky People left their greatest gift hidden until the world was ready. This may be the path to that gift. A third rumble, stronger than before, decided the matter for them. A crack appeared in the wall near the sealed entrance. "We need to move," Running Wolf urged. "If Fletcher's men break through, they must not find what lies deeper." Standing Hawk agreed. "The knowledge here is powerful for those who would misuse it." Harrington quickly finished his sketches. "Which way?" Standing Hawk pointed to a narrow opening on the chamber's far side, one that aligned with the path shown in the sphere's projection. "There's. The Ancient Ones have shown us the way." As they moved toward the opening, the light beam shifted one final time, illuminating an engraved warning above the passage entrance. Harrington translated haltingly. "Beyond this point, only those worthy may pass. All others will join the eternal stars." Standing Hawk met his companion's eyes. "The Ancient Ones do not give their knowledge freely. We must be prepared for what lies ahead." With the sounds of Fletcher's men growing louder behind them, they stepped into the passage, descending deeper into the Earth's mysteries. The passage descended at a steep angle, requiring careful footing on steps worn smooth by time. The crystal-generated light faded behind them, replaced by a strange phosphorescence that emanated from moss-like growth along the walls, another life form unknown to science. "The air remains fresh," Harrington noted with surprise. "Some form ventilation system must still be functioning." Standing Hawk led the way, the small metallic disc now warm in his hand. The Ancient Ones built to last beyond lifetimes. After descending what seemed like hundreds of feet, the passage leveled and widened into a junction where 3 tunnels branched in different directions. Standing Hawk held up the disc, which now emitted a faint hum when pointed toward the rightmost tunnel. "This way," he said with certainty. Behind them, distant but unmistakable, came the sound of voices echoing down the passage. Fletcher's men had broken through. "They're persistent," Running Wolf observed grimly. "Greed is a powerful motivator," Harrington replied, "especially when they've glimpsed technology beyond their understanding." They quickened their pace along the chosen tunnel, which curved gently before opening into a perfectly circular chamber, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Unlike previous chambers, this one was initially dark, their presence triggering no automatic illumination. "Wait," Standing Hawk cautioned as Running Wolf moved to light a torch. "Listen." In the darkness they became aware of a subtle sound, water flowing. As their eyes adjusted, they discerned narrow channels cut into the circular wall, where water moved in a continuous circuit around the room. "Remarkable hydraulic engineering," Harrington whispered. "Functional after thousands of years." At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, with what appeared to be a shallow basin. Standing Hawk approached cautiously, the metallic disc growing warmer in his hand. "In our oldest ceremonies," he said quietly, Water carries the voices of ancestors. We listen to running streams to hear their wisdom. Harrington examined the channels with scholarly interest. The water flow creates sound, very faint harmonics. Notice how the channel dimensions vary, changing the tones as water passes through. Running Wolf circled the room, following the water's path. It's a kind of music, but without a clear pattern. Standing Hawk studied the central base. It contained a small amount of water and was engraved with symbols around its rim. This is incomplete, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Guided by intuition and half-remembered tribal stories, Standing Hawk placed the metallic disc in the base immediately. The disc began to rotate, causing the water to form a perfect whirlpool. As it spun faster, the water in the wall channels responded, flowing more rapidly. The subtle harmonics grew louder, resolving into distinct tones that echoed throughout the chamber. Suddenly, soft light bloomed from recessed areas in the ceiling, illuminating the room. The water in the channels began to glow with the same phosphorescent quality they had observed in the moss. It's a resonance chamber, Harrington realized. The frequencies created by the water flow are activating something. As the tones reached a crescendo, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a passage that had been completely hidden moments before. Another test passed. Standing Hawk observed. Before they could proceed, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Fletcher's men had reached the junction of 3 tunnels. We need to seal this entrance too, Running Wolf urged. Harrington studied the central mechanism. The disc is the key. If we remove it, the passage may close, Standing Hawk finished, but we would lose our guide. A moment of decision faced them. Leave the disc and ensure their path forward remained open, or take it and hope the chamber would seal behind them. Standing Hawk made his choice. He carefully lifted the disc from the basin, but not before dipping his finger in the water and tracing one of the symbols engraved on the rim. The disc came free in his hand, but the whirlpool continued, the harmonic tones maintained. How did you know? Harrington asked in amazement. The symbol for memory, Standing Hawk explained. I believed the chamber would remember its purpose once awakened. They hurried through the newly revealed passage. Behind them, voices grew closer. Fletcher's men had chosen the correct tunnel. As the last of their group crossed the threshold, the harmonic tones shifted to a lower register. The wall began to slide closed. Through the narrowing gap they caught a glimpse of Mason and 2 other men entering the resonance chamber. Expressions of awe quickly changing to alarm as they realized their quarry was escaping. Wait, Mason shouted, rushing forward. But too late. The wall sealed completely, cutting off his voice and separating the 2 groups once more. Running Wolf exhaled with relief. That won't hold them forever. No, Standing Hawk agreed. They've followed our path once. They will do so again. The new passage led upward, a counterpoint to their earlier descent. Strange symbols lined the walls, glowing faintly with the same phosphorescence as the moss. We're being led somewhere specific, Harrington noted, documenting the symbols in his journal as they walked. Each chamber has tested different qualities: knowledge, perception, understanding of harmonics. Standing Hawk nodded. The worthy seeker must demonstrate wisdom in many forms. As they continued upward, a new sound reached them, running water but different from the controlled flow of the resonance chamber. This was the natural sound of a stream or river. We must be approaching the surface again, Running Wolf suggested. The passage widened, opening onto a ledge overlooking an underground river that cut through a massive cavern. Phosphorescent moss covered the ceiling, creating the illusion of a starry sky reflected in the dark water below. Another way out, Standing Hawk said, studying the river's flow, and perhaps a way to reach what we seek without Fletcher's men following. The underground river flowed steadily through the massive cavern, its black surface reflecting the phosphorescent ceiling like a mirror to another world. Standing Hawk studied the current, calculating risks. The flow is strong but not dangerous, he determined. We could follow it. Professor Harrington knelt at the water's edge, dipping his hand in cautiously. Remarkably cold. It must come from deep underground. Running Wolf pointed to where the river disappeared into a tunnel at the far end of the cavern. That may lead outside the canyon entirely, or deeper into the mountains, Standing Hawk countered. The ancient ones built with purpose. This river may be another path to what we seek. As they debated their next move, Harrington noticed something glinting in the sediment near the water's edge. He reached down and carefully extracted an object encrusted with mineral deposits. Brushing it clean revealed a gold cross pendant, tarnished but unmistakably European in design. "This is unexpected," he murmured, examining the artifact closely. The back bore an inscription in Spanish, with a date 1540. "Spanish conquistadors," Standing Hawk observed, peering over Harrington's shoulder. "They were here before us." Harrington nodded grimly. "Coronado's expedition. They explored this region seeking the 7 cities of gold." Running Wolf's expression darkened. "The men who brought disease and destruction to the peoples of this land. If they found this place centuries ago," Harrington mused, "why is there no record? This discovery would have been celebrated throughout Europe." Standing Hawk studied the pendant. Perhaps they never left to tell their tale. The implications hung heavy in the air. If Spanish explorers had entered these chambers and never returned, what fate might await them? Before they could discuss further, a faint echo of metal striking stone reached them. Fletcher's men had found another way through. "We need to move," Running Wolf urged. Harrington pocketed the pendant and they continued along the ledge that bordered the river. After 50 yards, they discovered a small inlet where several objects lay partially buried in silt. Decayed leather boots, rusted metal implements, and fragments of wooden crosses. A camp, Harrington realized, kneeling to examine the artifacts. The Spanish made it this far and stopped. Standing Hawk carefully uncovered what appeared to be a leather-bound journal, its pages fused together by time and moisture. Though largely unreadable, several passages remained legible. "Can you translate?" he asked Harrington. The professor examined the faded Spanish text, fragmentary but concerning. "This passage mentions voices from the walls and lights that follow our movements. This one speaks of men driven to madness by what they witnessed." Running Wolf found a rusted sword nearby. They were armed. What were they fighting? "Perhaps each other," Harrington suggested grimly. "Isolation and unexplainable phenomena can break men's minds." Standing Hawk discovered another object half buried in the silt, a primitive map drawn on parchment and sealed in a metal tube that had protected it from complete deterioration. The map showed the tunnel system they had navigated, with Spanish annotations. They explored extensively, Harrington noted, translating the labels. "This mark here, La Cámara del Juicio, the Chamber of Judgment. Where is it?" Running Wolf asked. Harrington pointed to location further along the river path. "There, and they've marked it with a warning. Death awaits the unworthy." Standing Hawk studied the map intently. "This chamber of judgment may be what we seek, where the ancient ones left their knowledge, or where the Spanish met their end," Running Wolf cautioned. The distant sounds of pursuit grew louder. Making their decision, they continued along the river ledge, following the path indicated on the Spanish map. After several hundred yards, the ledge widened into a small beach area where the river curved sharply. On the far side stood an imposing doorway cut directly into the rock face, flanked by columns similar to those they had seen above ground, but larger and more elaborately carved. "The Chamber of Judgment," Harrington whispered. As they approached the doorway, they noticed skeletons, at least 6, scattered near the entrance. The remains of Spanish conquistadors, their armor and weapons corroded but identifiable. "They died here," Running Wolf observed, trying to enter or fleeing what they found inside. Standing Hawk examined the doorway itself, which bore inscriptions in the same unknown language they had seen throughout the complex. "The final test lies beyond this threshold." Harrington studied the Spanish map again. According to this, they entered but never documented what they found. Their final entry simply states, "God forgive us for what we have witnessed." The sound of voices echoed across the cavern, Fletcher's men had reached the river ledge and spotted them. "We have no choice now," Standing Hawk said, holding up the metallic disc, which had begun to pulse with light as it neared the doorway. "We must go forward." As they crossed the threshold into the Chamber of Judgment, none of them noticed the subtle shift in the air, or how the phosphorescent light seemed to coalesce around them, following their movements like curious intelligent mist. Behind them, Fletcher's voice carried across the water. "Don't let them enter. Stop them before they reach the chamber." His urgent tone suggested he knew something about this place that they did not. Something that made even a man driven by greed hesitate at the threshold of discovery. The Chamber of Judgment extended before them, vast and imposing. Unlike the previous chambers, this one appeared to be a perfect hemisphere, its domed ceiling rising at least 100 feet above. The walls were covered with intricate engravings that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. At the chamber's center stood 7 tall figures arranged in a circle, humanoid statues, carved from a material that resembled black obsidian, but reflected light in impossible ways. Each statue held an outstretched hand toward the center of their circle, where a raised dais supported a single object. A prismatic crystal about the size of a man's head, glowing with internal light that cycled slowly through all colors of the spectrum. "Extraordinary," Harrington breathed, his scholarly caution momentarily forgotten. Standing Hawk studied the statues with recognition. "The 7 Watchers, they appear in our oldest stories." Running Wolf circled the chamber's perimeter warily. No sign of what killed the Spanish. Behind them, through the still open doorway, they could hear Fletcher and his men approaching along the river path. They had minutes at most before their pursuers arrived. "We need to understand what we're facing," Harrington said, examining the nearest statue. Though humanoid, its features were subtly different from any known human race. Slightly elongated cranium, large eyes, and 6-fingered hands. Standing Hawk approached the central dais, drawn to the prismatic crystal. The metallic disc in his hand grew warmer, vibrating in resonance with the larger crystal. "This is what we seek," he said with certainty. "The knowledge of the Ancient Ones." As he reached toward the crystal, Running Wolf called out a warning. "Father, wait. Remember the Spanish." Too late. Standing Hawk's fingers brushed the crystal's surface. Instantly, the chamber was filled with light as images exploded outward from the crystal, surrounding them with 3-dimensional projections that moved and shifted like living memories. They saw Spanish conquistadors entering the chamber, their expressions transforming from awe to terror as the crystal activated. The statues, which they now realized were not statues at all, but some kind of mechanical constructs, coming to life, moving with fluid grace, the Spanish drawing weapons, attacking in fear. The constructs responding not with violence but with light that emanated from their hands, engulfing the intruders. The memories shifted, showing earlier visitors, indigenous peoples from various eras approaching with reverence, communicating somehow with the constructs, receiving knowledge and departing unharmed. Then older memories, the chamber being built by beings who matched the appearance of the constructs, stars wheeling overhead as centuries passed in moments, the gradual burial of the complex beneath earth and rock, waiting, always waiting. With a gasp, Standing Hawk pulled his hand away, and the projections vanished. The 3 men stood in stunned silence. They weren't killed, Running Wolf realized. The Spanish, they attacked first and were tested. Standing Hawk finished. Found unworthy. Harrington struggled to process what he'd witnessed. Those beings, they're not statues. They're some kind of guardians, sleeping, Standing Hawk agreed. Or waiting. A new voice entered the conversation. Waiting for someone worthy of their knowledge. They turned to find William Fletcher standing in the doorway, alone, and his usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by an expression of reverent awe. "You know of this place," Standing Hawk said. It wasn't a question. Fletcher nodded slowly. "My grandfather was a scholar who studied the legends of this region. He found references to this site in Apache stories, in fragmentary Spanish accounts, in geological surveys that made no sense. He stepped into the chamber cautiously. I've spent 20 years searching for it, for profit, Running Wolf accused. At first, Fletcher admitted, but the more I learned, he gestured to the crystal and the 7 figures. They're not of this world. They came here thousands of years ago, bringing knowledge beyond our understanding. How do you know this? Harrington demanded. Fletcher reached into his coat and withdrew a small object, a shard of crystal similar to the larger one on the dais. My grandfather found this fragment near the canyon decades ago. It shows things, memories, knowledge. Standing Hawk studied Fletcher with new understanding. You sought the canyon not for gold, but for this chamber. I tried to keep others away, Fletcher explained. The land was worthless to settlers, so no one wanted it. Then you announced your intention to buy it, he sighed. I couldn't let anyone else find this place until I understood its purpose, which is... Running Wolf pressed, still suspicious. Before Fletcher could answer, the prismatic crystal pulsed brightly. The 7 figures, the guardians, began to move, their obsidian forms fluid and graceful as they turned in unison to face the humans. One stepped forward, its featureless face somehow focusing on Standing Hawk. When it spoke, they heard no sound, yet words formed in their minds with perfect clarity. The time of judgment has come. You have reached the heart of our legacy. Now you must prove yourselves worthy of what we left behind. The Guardian extended its 6-fingered hand, and the chamber transformed around them. The chamber dissolved around them, reality itself seeming to waver like heat over desert sand. Standing Hawk felt a strange sensation, as if his mind were expanding beyond the confines of his skull, stretching outward to touch other consciousnesses. He gasped as foreign thoughts and memories flooded his awareness. Harrington's childhood in Boston, poring over ancient texts by candlelight, Running Wolf's first hunt with his grandfather, and most surprisingly, Fletcher's decades-long obsession with finding this place, driven by his grandfather's deathbed confession about a crystal shard that showed impossible things. What's happening? Harrington's voice sounded distant, despite his standing nearby. They're connecting our minds, Standing Hawk realized. So we cannot hide our true intention. The Guardian who had addressed them remained before them, though the chamber had transformed into a featureless white space that extended infinitely in all directions. When it spoke again, its words resonated directly in their thoughts. We came to this world when yours was young, it explained. Your ancestors were primitive, but showed potential. We shared knowledge, taught them to build, to heal, to understand the stars. We established sanctuaries of learning across your world. Images flashed through their shared consciousness, massive structures being built on every continent under the guidance of the visitors. Pyramids, stone circles, temples, all serving as repositories of knowledge. Why did you leave? Fletcher asked, his mental voice revealing the question that had driven him for decades. Our time here was always temporary, the Guardian replied. Our home system was dying. We seeded many worlds with knowledge before our species faced extinction. Standing Hawk felt the profound sadness behind these words. The Guardian's personal memories of a dying world, a civilization making its final preparations to preserve its legacy. The judgment, Running Wolf pressed. What are you judging us for? Whether your kind is ready for what we left behind, came the answer. Knowledge is power. Power without wisdom brings destruction. Through their connected minds, each man experienced the other's reactions. Harrington's scientific curiosity burning like a flame. Fletcher's complex mixture of ambition and genuine reverence for the discovery. Running Wolf's concern for how such knowledge might affect his people. And Standing Hawk's deep understanding that some things must remain protected until the proper time. How is worthiness determined? Standing Hawk asked. By the content of your intentions, the Guardian explained, by your capacity for understanding consequence, by your willingness to protect knowledge rather than exploit it. The white space around them shifted, revealing scenes from Earth's history, warfare, environmental destruction, cruelty. then counterbalancing images of healing, cooperation, and sacrifice for others. Your species stands at a crossroads, the Guardian continued. The knowledge we safeguard could elevate your civilization beyond its current limitations, or it could provide tools for your own annihilation. Fletcher stepped forward, his mind now transparent to all present. I sought this place for personal gain, he admitted. But standing here, understanding what it truly is, I recognize my unworthiness. The sincerity of his confession resonated through their shared consciousness, surprising the others with its humility. Standing Hawk addressed the Guardian directly. What happens if we are judged unworthy? You will depart with altered memories, recalling only a cave exploration that revealed nothing of significance. The sanctuaries will remain hidden until others come who might prove worthy. Running Wolf's thoughts flared with concern, and if we are worthy, then you will bear the burden of guardianship, came the response. The knowledge must be protected, shared gradually as your civilization demonstrates readiness. Harrington's scientific mind was racing, calculating implications, the technological advancements. They could transform our understanding of physics, medicine, astronomy. Yes, the Guardian acknowledged. But advancement without ethical evolution leads to chaos. The white space dissolved, returning them to the chamber of judgment. The 7 Guardians now formed a circle around them, their obsidian hands extended. The judgment requires consensus, the first Guardian explained. You will each face a trial tailored to your innermost nature. These trials will reveal your true character, not as you present yourselves to others, but as you exist in your most private thoughts. Standing Hawk felt the other's apprehension matching his own. Through their still connected minds, he sensed Mason and the other men arriving at the chamber entrance, weapons drawn, but frozen in place, unable to intervene. Will we face these trials together? He asked. Each journey is solitary, the Guardian replied, yet interconnected. The outcome affects all. The Guardian approached Standing Hawk, its featureless face somehow conveying ancient wisdom. You sought this place through dreams and intuition. Your trial begins first. Standing Hawk felt the chamber dissolve once more as his consciousness separated from the others. He found himself standing alone on a mountaintop, under a night sky filled with unfamiliar stars, the sky as it had appeared thousands of years ago when the visitors first arrived. Begin, whispered a voice from everywhere and nowhere at once. Standing Hawk stood alone on the ancient mountaintop, the unfamiliar constellations wheeling slowly overhead. Before him appeared a shimmering stream of light that flowed through the air like a luminous river. Within its currents, images formed and dissolved, human figures moving through history. Behold the timeline of your kind, came the Guardian's voice, and your place within it. The flowing timeline zoomed in, focusing on specific figures, Standing Hawk's ancestors. He recognized some from tribal stories, others were unknown to him. He watched them leave, struggle, love, and die across centuries. Each made choices that ultimately led to his existence. What is this trial? Standing Hawk asked. Choice, replied the Guardian. The past is fixed, but you stand at a junction where many futures are possible. The timeline split into multiple branches, flowing forward from Standing Hawk's position. In one, he saw his people fading away, their knowledge lost. In another, the knowledge of the ancient ones used for destruction. In others, different outcomes, some hopeful, others devastating. You must choose which future to nurture, the Guardian explained, but first, understand the weight of what came before. The timeline shifted to show European contact, disease decimating tribes, broken treaties, forced relocations. Standing Hawk felt the accumulated grief of generations washing through him. Your people preserved fragments of our knowledge, the Guardian noted, even when they no longer understood its origin. This was not coincidence. Standing Hawk watched as ancestors performed ceremonies using symbols and patterns matching those in the canyon chambers. We were chosen as keepers. All peoples were given knowledge. The Guardian clarified. Many lost it through time or choice. Some preserved different portions. The timeline flowed to the present moment, then paused. Now choose, the Guardian commanded. What would you do with the knowledge of the stars if deemed worthy? Standing Hawk considered carefully. I would protect it. Share it gradually, first with those who would understand its proper context. Even if that meant the knowledge might never be fully revealed in your lifetime. Some truths require generations to be properly understood. Standing Hawk replied. And if others sought to take this knowledge by force? Standing Hawk watched the timeline branch showing conflict over the canyon's secrets. I would destroy access to the knowledge before letting it fall into hands that would misuse it, even at the cost of your life. Your people's claim to the canyon. The knowledge is not meant to belong to any one people, Standing Hawk realized. The worthy guardians serve the knowledge, not themselves. The timeline shifted again, showing his son, Running Wolf, facing his own trial. Running Wolf found himself in a vast library unlike anything he had ever seen. Shelves stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with books, scrolls, and devices of unrecognizable design. This repository contains all knowledge gathered by our civilization across thousands of worlds, the Guardian explained, appearing beside him. Your trial concerns the balance between tradition and progress. Before Running Wolf appeared two books. One contained the complete history and traditions of his people. The other held scientific knowledge that could transform humanity's understanding of the universe. In your heart, the Guardian observed, you stand between worlds, the traditions of your ancestors, and the changing future. You question which path to follow. Running Wolf nodded. I respect our ways, but I also see how the world changes around us. If forced to choose between preserving your people's traditions and embracing new knowledge that contradicts those traditions, what would you do? Running Wolf studied both books thoughtfully. Must they be in conflict? Can new understanding not enhance, rather than replace traditional wisdom? Often they seem opposed, the Guardian noted. What then? I would seek the truth that connects them, Running Wolf answered. Our stories speak of sky people bringing knowledge. Modern science now suggests life may exist beyond our world. Different languages describing the same reality. The Guardian gestured to the endless library. And if you discovered knowledge here that contradicted everything you believe, I would question, learn, and grow, Running Wolf replied. Wisdom lies not in clinging to beliefs despite evidence, nor in discarding tradition without understanding its deeper purpose. The Guardian seemed to nod. And what of those who refuse to question their beliefs? Who reject new knowledge out of fear? I would meet them where they stand, Running Wolf said. Patience and respect build bridges that force cannot. The library dissolved around him, but instead of students, the audience consisted of his academic peers, the most respected scholars in his field. Your trial concerns the courage of conviction, the Guardian explained, materializing beside him, and the humility to acknowledge when you are wrong. On the podium before him lay his research on the canyon chambers, detailed documentation of everything they had discovered, evidence that would overturn established archaeological understanding. Present your findings, the Guardian instructed. Harrington began speaking, describing the chambers, artifacts and guardians. As he spoke, he watched his colleagues' expressions transform from interest to skepticism to outright derision. Preposterous, no credible evidence. Career suicide. Their reactions reflected what he knew would happen in reality, rejection of truth that didn't fit existing paradigms. Would you withhold your discoveries to preserve your reputation, the Guardian asked, or risk everything for truth that few will accept? Harrington straightened his posture. Truth matters more than reputation. I would publish knowing the ridicule I'd face, because evidence eventually overcomes prejudice. And if evidence were destroyed, if you had only your words, then I would still speak truth, even if I were the only one who believed it. The lecture hall transformed, showing Harrington decades later vindicated by subsequent discoveries, but only after years of being professionally ostracized. Is truth worth such a price? The Guardian asked. Harrington watched his older self, worn but unbowed. Truth does not ask our permission to exist. Its worth is inherent, not measured, its reception. The scene faded. In the chamber of judgment, the physical forms of Standing Hawk, Running Wolf, and Harrington stood motionless, their consciousnesses elsewhere. Fletcher watched them with growing concern, then turned to the Guardian. "What of my trial?" he asked. "Yours has already begun," the Guardian replied. "The most difficult trial of all." Fletcher felt a presence behind him, and turned to find Mason and his other men entering the chamber, no longer frozen. "Mr. Fletcher," Mason called, "we've secured the chamber as requested. What are your orders regarding these men?" Fletcher realized with sudden clarity his trial was playing out in reality, not vision. The choice he made now would determine everything. Fletcher stood frozen between worlds, the spiritual trials occurring in the minds of the others, and the physical reality of Mason and his men entering the chamber with weapons ready. In this moment of decision, he felt the Guardian's presence in his mind. "Your trial is choice made manifest," the voice explained, "not in vision but in action." Mason approached, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Sir, your order?" Fletcher looked at the motionless forms of Standing Hawk, Running Wolf, and Harrington, vulnerable in their trance-like state. Then at the 7 Guardians, watching him with ancient patience. Everything he had sought for decades lay within his grasp. "Secure the perimeter," Fletcher said carefully. "No one enters, no one leaves, and no harm comes to these men." Mason frowned. "But sir, our arrangement has changed," Fletcher interrupted firmly. "This place is not what we thought. It's not about gold or profit." "We weren't paid to have philosophical revelations," Mason replied, his hand tightening on his pistol grip. "We were paid to secure whatever valuables this place contained." Fletcher stood his ground. "And I'm paying you now to stand down." The tension in the chamber built as Mason exchanged glances with the other men. Then, with deliberate slowness, he drew his weapon, not pointing it directly at Fletcher, but making his position clear. "I think you've been affected by whatever strangeness exists here," Mason said. "Once we've secured the artifacts, you'll thank me for thinking clearly." As Mason took a step toward the central crystal, the Guardian nearest Fletcher moved with liquid grace, interposing itself between Mason and his goal. The other Guardians similarly positioned themselves around the still entranced men. "What the hell are these things?" one of Mason's men exclaimed, raising his rifle. "Don't shoot," Fletcher warned, but too late. The rifle blast echoed through the chamber as the bullet struck the nearest Guardian and passed through its obsidian form without effect. In response, the Guardian extended its hand, and the rifle crumbled to dust. "Jesus Christ," Mason whispered, his own pistol now aimed directly at the Guardian. Fletcher seized the moment of shock. "This is beyond any of us. These beings are not our enemies unless we make them so." The central crystal pulsed with intensifying light. From it emerged a small sphere of what appeared to be liquid metal, hovering in the air before Fletcher. As he watched, it transformed, flowing into different shapes, tools, weapons, mechanical devices beyond his understanding. "The gift requires worthy guardians," the voice echoed in his mind. "Will you protect or exploit?" Fletcher understood this was the culmination of his trial. He reached out slowly, and the liquid metal flowed into his palm, cool and somehow alive. In his mind flashed visions of what this substance could create: technologies to heal the sick, harness limitless energy, or forge weapons that could destroy nations. Mason's eyes widened at the sight. "What is that? Is it valuable?" "Beyond any measure," Fletcher replied truthfully, "and not meant for us to possess." With deliberate care, Fletcher returned the living metal to the crystal. As he did, Standing Hawk, Running Wolf, and Harrington began to stir, their trials complete. Mason's patience ended. "Enough of this nonsense. Men, secure the artifacts and these statues if possible. We're taking whatever has value." "No," Fletcher said, placing himself between Mason and the others. "I was wrong to come here seeking wealth. These are not treasures to be plundered. Mason's expression hardened. "Step aside, Mr. Fletcher. I cannot." The tension broke as Mason raised his pistol toward Fletcher, and found himself suddenly facing Standing Hawk, who had awakened from his trance-like state with remarkable awareness of the situation. "This sacred place is not for taking," Standing Hawk said calmly. "Only for learning." Running Wolf and Harrington regained consciousness as well, rising to stand with Fletcher and Standing Hawk against Mason and his men. The 7 Guardians moved in unison, forming a circle around the humans. The chamber itself began to vibrate, dust falling from the domed ceiling. "What's happening?" Harrington asked, steadying himself against a tremor that shook the floor. "The final judgment approaches," Standing Hawk replied, "for all of us." The central crystal's light intensified until it was painful to look at directly. From it, a voice that all could hear proclaimed, "4 have been tested. 4 have chosen wisely, though through different paths." Mason backed away, fear replacing avarice in his expression. "Fletcher, tell these things to let us leave. Whatever payment you promised, I'll forget it." But Fletcher's attention remained on the crystal as the living metal emerged once more, this time separating into 4 equal portions that hovered before Standing Hawk, Running Wolf, Harrington, and himself. "The knowledge of creation is offered," the voice continued. "With it comes the burden of protection. Do you accept this responsibility, knowing it may consume your lives and the lives of your descendants?" Standing Hawk stepped forward first. "I accept this sacred trust." The portion of living metal before him flowed onto his palm, then absorbed into his skin like water into sand. His eyes widened as knowledge flooded his consciousness, understanding beyond anything he had imagined. The chamber trembled more violently, larger pieces of the ceiling breaking loose. "The sanctuary awakens fully," the Guardian warned. "After millennia of dormancy, its energies are unstable. You must choose quickly, for this place will soon return to the earth from which it rose." The chamber shuddered violently, ancient dust raining down as larger chunks of ceiling crashed to the floor. Running Wolf stepped forward next, his decision made. "I accept this responsibility," he declared, extending his hand. The second portion of living metal flowed onto his palm, absorbing into his skin. His eyes widened as knowledge flooded his mind, scientific principles, mathematical concepts, technological understanding far beyond 19th century comprehension. Professor Standing Hawk called to Harrington, who stood transfixed by the spectacle. Harrington hesitated only briefly. "For knowledge and truth," he said, stepping forward. "I accept." The third portion of living metal merged with him, and the historian gasped as centuries of accumulated wisdom transferred into his consciousness. Languages long dead, civilizations unknown to modern archaeology, sciences undiscovered by Earth's brightest minds, all suddenly accessible to him. Fletcher alone remained undecided, the 4th portion hovering before him. Mason and his men had retreated to the chamber entrance, weapons lowered, awe and fear having replaced greed. "The choice must be unanimous," the Guardian's voice explained, as the chamber continued to destabilize. 4 Guardians to maintain balance, 4 perspectives to ensure wisdom. Fletcher looked at the others, who had already accepted. "I sought this place for the wrong reasons," he admitted. "Am I truly worthy?" "Worthiness is not perfection," Standing Hawk replied, his voice carrying new depth. "It is recognition of responsibility." Another violent tremor shook the chamber. A massive section of the ceiling gave way, narrowly missing them. "Decide quickly," the Guardian urged. "The energy contained here can no longer be controlled. It must be dispersed, or it will destroy everything within the canyon." Fletcher made his choice. "I accept this trust," he said, receiving the final portion of living metal. As it merged with him, he stumbled under the weight of sudden understanding, the true nature of the universe, the history of the Guardian civilization, the purpose of their journey to Earth. The central crystal, now glowing with blinding intensity, rose from its date. Beneath it appeared a new device, a crystalline lens of incredible complexity. "The convergence lens," the Guardian explained as the chamber continued to collapse around them. "Through it, all knowledge can be accessed." But it requires the combined understanding of all four guardians to operate safely. Standing Hawk approached the lens, guided by his new knowledge. We must stabilize the energy before it's released. The four men positioned themselves around the lens, each somehow knowing exactly where to stand. As they reached toward it simultaneously, their fingertips barely touching its surface, the lens activated. A column of light erupted upward, passing through the hole in the ceiling and into the sky above. Through their connected minds they witnessed the complete history of the Ancient Ones, a civilization born around a distant star, their evolution spanning millions of years, their development of technologies indistinguishable from magic to human understanding, their discovery that their sun was dying, their risen to seed their knowledge throughout the galaxy before their extinction, their journey to Earth and other worlds. "My God," Harrington whispered, "they're gone. Their entire civilization, not gone." Standing Hawk corrected, "Transformed. Their knowledge lives in us now." Mason and his men watched in terrified fascination from the entrance as the chamber continued to collapse. "Fletcher," Mason called, "we need to leave now." But Fletcher, like the others, remained focused on the lens. Through it, they controlled the energy release, channeling it upward rather than outward. The light column intensified, visible for miles across the territory. "The sanctuary must return to the Earth," the Guardian explained, "its form beginning to fade. Its physical purpose is complete. The knowledge is transferred." "What about you?" Running Wolf asked. "The Guardians? Our consciousness merges with yours," came the reply. "We have waited millennia for worthy successors. Now our vigil ends." The 7 Guardians approached the 4 men, their obsidian forms dissolving into pure energy that flowed into the human Guardians. With each transfer, the men's understanding expanded exponentially. "You must leave this place," the last Guardian warned, as its form began to fade. "It returns to the elements." A massive section of the ceiling collapsed, blocking one of the exits. Mason and his men fled down the remaining passage toward the underground river. Standing Hawk looked at his companions, all of them forever changed. "We have what we came for," he said, "knowledge that must be protected, not possessed." They reluctantly stepped away from the lens, which continued to project its column of light. As they moved toward the exit, Fletcher turned back one last time. "What do we do now?" he asked. "How do we protect this knowledge?" Standing Hawk's expression showed both the weight and wonder of their new responsibility. "We learn first to understand it ourselves. Then we share it gradually, as humanity becomes ready." The final Guardian's voice echoed as its form disappeared completely. "The stars await your children's children. Prepare them well." The 4 men hurried through the collapsing passage, the chamber behind them filling with fallen stone, as the sanctuary of the Ancient Ones returned to the earth from which it had been carved thousands of years before. Above ground, across the territory, people stared in wonder at the column of light rising from Shadow Creek Canyon into the evening sky, a beacon of knowledge that would change everything, though few would understand how or why for generations to come. 6 months had passed since the night of the light column. Shadow Creek Canyon's landscape had transformed. The entrance to the underground chambers collapsed completely, leaving only a deep depression in the earth where the domed chamber had been. Nature had already begun reclaiming the site, desert plants taking root in the freshly exposed soil. Standing Hawk sat on the porch of a newly constructed cabin overlooking the canyon. His fingers worked methodically, carving intricate symbols into the edge of a circular wooden table, symbols that would have been meaningless to him before but now flowed from his hands with practiced ease. The sound of approaching horses drew his attention. Running Wolf arrived first, followed by Professor Harrington and William Fletcher. The unlikely brotherhood of Guardians gathered once more. "The table is finished," Standing Hawk said as they dismounted. Fletcher ran his hand along the polished surface, feeling the embedded symbol. Perfect craftsmanship. The old language preserved in a new form. "How was your journey east, Professor?" Running Wolf asked as they entered the cabin. Harrington removed his hat. His appearance subtly changed. The same man physically, but carrying himself with it new purpose and quiet confidence. Harvard and Yale both rejected my modest papers on theoretical ancient civilizations, he reported with a slight smile. But seeds have been planted in receptive minds. Small step. They seated themselves around the circular table, each instinctively taking the position that corresponded to their role, Standing Hawk as wisdom keeper, Running Wolf as bridge between worlds, Harrington as academic translator, and Fletcher as practical implementer. The territorial governor continues to inquire about the atmospheric phenomenon observed here, Fletcher informed them. I've convinced him it was likely electrical in nature, similar to aurora borealis. Scientific curiosity has been satisfied for now. Standing Hawk nodded approval. And your business ventures? Transformed, Fletcher replied. I've divested from mining interests and established a foundation to preserve archaeological sites throughout the territory. Most think me eccentric. I can live with that. Running Wolf placed a small journal on the table. I've been documenting our people's oral traditions, finding the embedded knowledge we never recognized before. The star maps in our ceremonial sand paintings, they're astronomically accurate. They each carried the living metal within them now, their bodies unchanged outwardly but fundamentally altered at a cellular level. Occasionally, when concentration or need arose, the metal would emerge, flowing to their fintrip to create small tools or devices, before reabsorbing. Benjamin asks questions, Standing Hawk said, referring to his friend at the trading post. He senses the change in us but cannot name it. Elizabeth too, Running Wolf added. She notices how my understanding of her books has expanded. Harrington leaned forward. Which brings us to our purpose today. How much do we reveal, and to whom? We each came to this responsibility through different paths, but now must find consensus. From his pocket, Fletcher withdrew a small object, a perfect miniature replica of the convergence lens, created from his portion of the living metal. He placed it at the table's center. I can begin manufacturing precision instruments based on principles I now understand, he suggested. Nothing that would seem impossible, just ahead of their time. Gradual introduction of new technologies. My academic connections could disseminate theoretical concepts, Harrington offered, preparing the scientific community for discoveries they'll make independently in coming decades. Running Wolf nodded thoughtfully. I can preserve knowledge through stories and art. Cultural preparation matters as much as technological. Standing Hawk listened to each perspective before speaking. We must be patient. The ancient ones waited thousands of years for worthy guardians. We may not see the fulfillment of our work in our lifetimes. But our children might, Running Wolf said, or their children. Fletcher's expression grew solemn. Mason and his men have spread wild stories in saloons across the territory. Most dismiss them as drunken fantasy, but others wonder. There will always be those who seek power without wisdom. Standing Hawk acknowledged. Our responsibility includes protection as well as preservation. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon, the four guardians continued their counsel, mapping out a careful path forward. Their discussions flowed with unusual harmony, four distinct perspectives converging toward balanced decisions. When evening approached, they stepped outside to watch the sunset over Shadow Creek Canyon. The land that had once seemed worthless to settlers now held the buried remnants of humanity's greatest inheritance and its future. The ancient ones chose this place for its isolation, Harrington observed. Yet they must have known it wouldn't remain isolated forever. They chose it for the people who would find it. Standing Hawk corrected, looking meaningfully at his companions. The worthy seekers. Fletcher gazed toward the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They're still out there, other worlds, other civilizations. And someday, humanity will join them, Running Wolf added. Standing Hawk nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to the small medallion he now wore. A simple disc of living metal he had shaped from a tiny portion of his gift. Through it, he occasionally glimpsed flashes of possible futures, humanity's slow but steady progress toward the stars. We have been entrusted with the beginning of a journey, he said quietly, one that will continue long after we are gone. As night fell completely, the four guardians stood in companionable silence, watching the ancient constellations emerge overhead, the same stars that had guided the ancient ones to Earth millennia ago, and that would someday guide humanity outward to continue the cycle of knowledge. The canyon that had once echoed with mockery now held the quiet promise of humanity's greatest potential, not in gold or material wealth, but in wisdom passed from one worthy civilization to the next.